Why is it that so many of these radical socialists and left-wing activists today just so happen to come from affluent backgrounds? Why are rich kids radical? Bode here, and in this video I'll attempt to provide some potential answers as to why rich kids are radical by sharing some different hypotheses about the potential causes, some of which come from historical and philosophical explanations to even some that are more psychiatric, to try and pin down some of the potential root causes of why rich kids gravitate towards socialist ideas. Let's just start with a little historical context, because we see this tendency today, but it's actually not new, which to me makes it even more interesting and more likely that there is some correlation between wealthy kids becoming socialist. For example, in the 1960s, the radical communist group, the Weather Underground, like the radicals of today, were also quite often the kin of the wealthy. When you look at some of the key players, there's, of course, the legendary domestic terrorists and Barack Obama mentor, Bill Ayers, who was a rich kid being the son of a Chicago executive. Other prominent members and spoiled radicals of the Weather Underground were Kathy Boudin. Kathy Boudin's father, Leonard Boudin, was a wealthy, big-time lawyer who represented high-profile clients like Jimmy Hoffa. Similar backgrounds consist for other radical activists of the time like Bernadine Dorn, who grew up in Whitefish Bay, an upper-class suburb of Milwaukee, or Jeff Jones, who was a founding member and leader of the Weather Underground, who grew up with a wealthy father who worked for Walt Disney. And the same story applies to Mark Rudd and Leo Burt and many of these other radicals that had very privileged upbringings. Even the New York Times acknowledged this trend back in 1981 when they described the Weathermen as a chilling perversion of every purpose they ever had, the children of the rich killing the less privileged in the name of revolution. It was clear that their rage had become psychosis, their struggle was with self-hatred, and the only revolution they would fight was the one taking place in their own minds. But relating back to the present, today there's a plethora of wealthy kids who have followed similar paths. Many of the members, and in some cases most, of Antifa are upper-class, wealthy white kids. Take, for example, Sable Knapp. Knapp comes from a prominent Iowa family and is a self-described trust fund baby, spending her adult years advocating for social equality, wealth redistribution, and racial justice. Knapp married Lee Boyd Malvo, who was one of the DC snipers that killed 10 people in 2002, or you could take the former Vox Media commentator Carlos Maza, who identifies as a New York-based socialist and tells viewers to stop taking political advice from the ultra-wealthy. The self-confessed socialist mother was one of the founders of Ultimate Software and owned several multi-million-dollar estates, including a $4.4 million luxury condo and $7.1 million Manhattan pad. Or take the New York City terrorist who threw Molotov cocktails at police cars, who grew up in Manhattan's Upper East Side and attended a prestigious private school. Her parents are a prominent oncologist and a realtor, and her Facebook friends showed a who's who of the sons and daughters of some of New York's richest and most notable families. One of the Black Lives Matter protesters busted in a window-smashing rampage is the son of two accomplished comic book writers. Rocco was arrested on a felony charge along with another wealthy upper-class East Sider, Clara Kraber, whose mother runs a Manhattan architect firm that designs spaces for Columbia and NYU, while her father is a psychiatrist teaching at Columbia. Her family also owns several million-dollar residences. But this trend isn't limited to America either. The artist behind the A Surge of Power 2020, Mark Quinn, is one of the most privileged white men in the UK. His father was an internationally renowned physicist, and he attended one of the most expensive private boarding schools in the country, and then went on to Cambridge. I mean, the list goes on. It goes on to more prominent individuals like the Walt Disney heir Abigail Disney, or prominent Seattle billionaire Nick Hanauer. But why? Why are rich kids radical? Well, here's a few potential reasons. The first is guilt. So let's, for example, take the two I just mentioned, Abigail Disney and Nick Hanauer. Abigail Disney is the heir to the Walt Disney Empire. However, Abigail Disney seems to spend a lot of her time attacking rich people and advocating for other forms of wealth redistribution and higher taxes and all other socialist things like it. And a similar background exists for Nick Hanauer. If you don't know him, he's given a banned TED Talk, written a few books, and has even debated people like Ben Shapiro about the $15 minimum wage, of which he's a strong supporter. Hanauer was born into an ultra-wealthy family who owns a business with a $300 million annual revenue stream. In his 30s, he invested money that he never earned into another business called Amazon. For being one of Amazon's first investors, combined with his own personal family wealth, has now made him a billionaire. In other words, Nick Hanauer grew up in extreme wealth, took over a business he didn't build, and then made even more money by investing money he never earned into another company, Amazon, that he also didn't build. So you can see how someone like that might look around and see people struggling and feel guilty, because for people like Abigail Disney and Nick Hanauer, they must see people who are smarter and more hardworking than them and yet struggle to make ends meet, while they live a life of luxury and comfort with minimal effort. It's conceivable this guilt in the great disparity of wealth makes them believe there is something fundamentally wrong with the system. Some psychologists maintain that their urgency derives from a guilt complex, feeling that they have no right to the wealth they inherited, that this wealth was ill-gotten. They have a compulsion to alter the system whereby their fathers or grandfathers accumulated this abundance. The classically liberal sociologist Helmut Schoch argues that such guilt may lead a person to forego their old life in order to serve the less fortunate, but that many times such a person does not seek to extirpate their guilt by leaving their own comfortable station, but rather by insisting that the entire world must join them in eradicating inequality. In Schoch's words, I have no doubt that one of the most important motives for joining an egalitarian political movement is this anxious sense of guilt. In fact, that almost precisely describes the behaviors of radicals like the Weather Underground to elites like Abigail Disney and Nick Hanauer. Of course, these rich kids could give away their wealth at any time, but instead they opt to spend their time publicly pronouncing why the entire system should change. To alleviate their guilt of being bourgeoisie, they must find a way to feel as if they are not bourgeoisie. A perfect example of this guilt-pushing radicals rich kids towards socialism can be shown here, which was written by a wealthy college kid at Columbia University. She wrote, "It's tremendously uncomfortable to admit that to myself yet another way in which I have benefited and continue to benefit from the oppression of other people, in the form of, for example, receiving financial wealth from the company my father works for, investors in which are connected to companies funded by some workers who don't earn a living wage. We can engage with these facts and leverage our privilege as part of the complex, cross-class, solidaritas process to forge a more just society." So for these rich kids, the easiest way to alleviate their guilt is to bemoan the current system and attack its fundamental structure. The existing framework has only given them guilt, and so the type of glory they're looking for cannot be achieved with this system, so we must get rid of it. Another hypothesis for why rich kids are radical would be that they are likely to hold a Freudian worldview. In the anti-capitalistic mentality, Mises blames inherited wealth for these rich kid revolutionaries. The Protestant ethic, established due to Christian Protestants' reputation for being hardworking individuals, now known as work ethic, held that man is by nature a sturdy individual, self-reliant and responsible. The opposite of the Protestant ethic is the Freudian ethic. Frank Chodorov writes, "In the Freudian view, society is to blame for all the sufferings of mankind. Therefore, we need to alter society to make the path of life easier and more comfortable. The way to alter society to fit the Freudian pattern is through government action. This is called social legislation, which turns out to be handouts of tax money. And the sons of rich men, those whose fathers have taken care of all their needs and wants since birth, are inclined to look upon this Freudian concept with favor. They are all forgiving for taking care of people and for relieving them of responsibility." Another potential reason rich kids are radical is simply to moralize. In Paul Russell's essay on moralism, he describes moralism as the misuse of morality for ends and purposes that are themselves vicious or corrupt. Moralizers present the facade of genuine moral concern, but their real motivations rest with interests of a very different character, inflating their social and moral standing in the eyes of others, flaunting moral virtues for others to praise and admire. When these motivations are en masse, they are shown to be tainted and considerably less attractive than we suppose. Moralizers of this kind are essentially superficial and fraudulent, to any number of highly paid professors whining and dining on the lecture circuit while explaining the need for social justice and advocating extreme forms of egalitarianism. Russell categorizes moralism into two distinct categories: vain moralism and cruel moralism, each with its own set of traits and vices. He notes the particular motivations behind vain moralism largely account for the cluster of vices associated with it. This includes hypocrisy, sanctimoniousness, pomposity, pretension, and conformism. These vices are all evidence that vain moralism is at work. So if you think about the wealthy elites fitting this profile, I think of like Al Gore, Michael Moore, Leonardo DiCaprio. They seem to be perfect examples of these vain moralizers. These vain moralizers and grandstanders want others to regard them as being morally respectable or even morally remarkable, and the contributions they make to public moral discourse are intended to satisfy that desire. The grandstander's primary concern is projecting an image of him or herself as someone who is on the side of angels. Grandstanding takes many forms. In a quest to impress peers, grandstanders trump up moral charges, pile on cases of public shaming, announce that anyone who disagrees with them is obviously wrong, or exaggerate emotional displays. So think about Greta Thunberg, David Hogg, and a lot of members of the media. But here's where moralism quickly morphs into radicalism, and in some cases, socialism. This happens through the process of ramping up. Ramping up happens by making increasingly strong claims in order to outdo one another. Each wants to show greater moral insight and care for justice, and one way to do that is to stake out increasingly extreme claims. When ramping up, discussion devolves into a moral arms race. This is why moral grandstanding can be so harmful. Ramping up contributes to group polarization, where individuals come to hold more extreme views after deliberating with others, rather than moving towards a moderate consensus. The result of a moral arms race is that people will tend to adopt extreme and implausible views and refuse to listen to the other side. Polarization makes compromise more difficult. The winner of the moral arms race is the just and pure one, and why should we compromise with the morally impure? This is an especially bad outcome in democratic societies. So you can see the variations of these wealthy radicals in the descriptions of moralizers and grandstanders. And you can see shades of guilt and moralizing in a myriad of ways. So remember Carlos Maza? When he tweeted about his wealthy upbringing when it was about to become public, he tweeted, "I've spent my professional life trying to use that privilege to advocate for a better world. That includes advocating for economic justice and specifically an economic system that would shift power away from the ultra-wealthy and back to the working class. I am aware that I am advocating for a system that would shift power away from members of my family. I still think it's the right thing to do." So this is a pretty striking statement. Maza can achieve his personal goals by relieving his guilt without making any sacrifice at all. His family wealth would sacrifice their wealth. The middle class will sacrifice their wealth, but Maza sacrifices nothing and gains everything. It's not his money after all. But he makes no sacrifice, but reaps all the moral benefits and alleviates his own guilt through moralizing. Alan Bloom writes, "There is a perennial and unobtrusive view that morality consists in such things as telling the truth, paying one's debts, respecting one's parents, and doing no voluntary harm to anyone. Those are all easy things to say and hard to do. They do not attract much attention, but its fulfillment is the activity of a lifetime of performing the simple duties prescribed by it. This morality always requires sacrifice. Such morality, in order to be itself, must be for itself and not for some reason beyond it. It requires resistance to the charms of feeling good about it and a claim for it. But for the spoiled wealthy kids, discipline and moderation are scarce. Thus, the benefits of moralizing via socialism might be irresistible, especially when the existing status of these elites entitles them to the luxury beliefs by which there is no consequence for being wrong." So another potential reason for the radical nature of rich kids is simply vanity. This theory advanced by G.K. Chesterton that the rich are radical because they are always in the forefront of new fashions, in thought as well as customs. As the shop girl took to cigarette smoking after the better class ladies made the practice popular, so the socialist nostrums became popular only after the wealthy made them respectable. In other words, socialist ideas masquerade as altruism, which then become fashionable for the rich. Ron Henderson wrote a great piece for the New York Post about these luxury beliefs. He writes, "In the past, upper-class Americans used to display their social status with luxury goods. Today, they do it with luxury beliefs. People care a lot about social status. In fact, research indicates that respect and admiration from our peers are even more important than money. We feel pressure to display our status in new ways. This is why fashionable clothing always changes. But as trendy clothes and other products become more accessible and affordable, there is an increasingly less status attached to luxury goods. The upper classes have found a clever solution to this problem: luxury beliefs. These are ideas and opinions that confer status on the rich at very little cost, while taking a toll on the lower class. Often members of the upper class claim that racial disparities stem from inherent advantages held by whites, yet Asian Americans are more educated, have higher earnings, and live longer than whites. Affluent whites are the most enthusiastic about the idea of white privilege, yet they are the least likely to incur any cost for promoting that belief. Rather, they raise their social standing by talking about their privilege. In her 2018 book, Political Tribes, Yale law professor Amy Chua quotes a student from rural South Carolina, "I think protesting is almost a status symbol for elites. That's why they always post pictures on Facebook, so all their friends know they're protesting. We don't like being used as a prop for someone else's self-validation." The heirs of the overclass have little understanding of the policies for which they advocate, such as the infamous call to abolish the police. Only those who have never been victimized by violence could promote such a policy. These rich radicals despise police officers who are far more likely to be non-white and come from working class backgrounds. Even Al Sharpton rebuked these rich radicals when he said, "To take policing off is something that I think a latte liberal may go for, as they sit around the Hamptons discussing this as some academic problem." So, Like with the diamond rings or designer clothes of old, upper-class people don a luxury belief to separate themselves from lower classes. These beliefs, in turn, produce real, tangible consequences for the disadvantaged people, further widening the divide between them and the lower classes. Another possible theory for why rich kids are radical is boredom and lack of purpose. Dennis Prager writes, "Boredom, at least in our time, is the most overlooked source of evil. Idle hands are the devil's workshop," was a commonly used aphorism. By bored, I mean a deep boredom of the soul. The combination of affluence and secularism produces boredom as surely as the combination of hydrogen and oxygen produces water. Without affluence, people have a built-in purpose, obtaining food and shelter, supporting oneself and one's family, and religion, with or without affluence, has always provided people with meaning. A wealthy kid with whatever they want at their fingertips and a never-ending indulgence of luxury and pleasure might be, well, empty inside. No purpose, no goals, just a lot of time and a lot of shiny toys. It's certainly possible that radical leftism is a perfect solution to fill this gap. Something to yearn for, something to believe in. After all, it's the wealthy who are statistically more likely to be atheist or agnostic. Daniel Greenfield writes, "Radicals don't learn about reality from reality. Instead, they map their internal emotional states onto the outside world. That is why radicalism has been the timeless hobby of the children of privileged classes, who have the ego and leisure time to dramatize their emotional states as a moral crisis encompassing the world." Victor Davis Hanson writes, "The woke but godless, the arrogant but ignorant, the violent but physically unimpressive, the degreed but poorly educated, the broke but acquisitive, the ambitious but stalled, these are history's ingredients of riot and revolution." Another hypothesis is the power complex theory. Remember the vain moralizer? That was only one type of moralizer. In Russell's essay, he outlines two types of moralizers, the second of which being the cruel moralizer, which closely aligns with the power complex theory. Russell writes, "These kids have had pretty much their own way since birth, have become satiated with the things that their economic power gave them, and are looking for new worlds to conquer. They yearn for political power for its own sake, not for any increase in economic power which they have always enjoyed." This is the second type of moralizer, the cruel moralizer. What gives cruel moralizers satisfaction is not enhancing their moral standing in the eyes of others, but rather the suffering and humiliation of others as a means to achieve power and domination over them. So cruel moralizers would be the likes of Antifa and Black Lives Matter, and the soldiers of cancel culture who relish in the misery and destruction of other people. Russell's theory means that achieving this power confirms the moralizer's sense of superiority over others and provides further validation for their ideals and values. It is self-validation, not validation to others, that cruel moralizers care about and seek to confirm. Imposing suffering and humiliation on the guilty and morally flawed provides this validation, and becomes a deep source of motivation in their own ethical conduct and responses. In the hands of the cruel moralizer, morality lends itself to misrepresentation and misuse, and is liable to become cruel and sadistic. Just as the motivation of the cruel moralizer is very different from that of the vain moralizer, so too is the principal set of vices associated with it. What comes with cruel moralism are vices such as severity, vindictiveness, dogmatism, and authoritarianism. Causing suffering and humiliation through the instrument of morality is the means by which it's achieved. I mean, when I read this, I thought, yes, this is exactly Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and cancel culture. Who goes around destroying other people and harassing people at restaurants for no reason? Like, what kind of people get off on stuff like that? Well, the cruel moralizer does. But the power complex theory is basically accruing power through cruel moralizing. Thomas Sowell references a Professor Ronald Dworkin's, his proclamation that a more equal society is a better society, even if its citizens prefer inequality. That is one of the reasons why vast inequalities of political power must be created in pursuit of economic equality. The only sure winners are those who exalt themselves as the arbiters of the fates of millions. And even more serious injustice can occur if government officials are given greater powers in order to have them create social justice. For once the powers have been given, they can be used to create despotism instead, as have happened in revolutions like the French and Bolshevik revolutions. So basically, this hypothesis is that they advocate for socialism for power, that being a comrade of socialism can give them the type of political power and influence that they seek, because they have no interest in accruing power through wealth, since they already have that, so they go towards political power. Another theory for why rich kids are radical is simply to beef up their ego, or self-exaltation. Thomas Sowell writes, just as ancient tyrants gave the people bread and circuses in exchange for their loyalty, so visions can acquire a tyrannical sway over people's minds by offering them an exalted sense of themselves in exchange for their loyalty to the vision through all the vicissitudes of the fact to the contrary. The one consistency among them is that the conclusions reached exalt those who share the vision over the great unwashed who do not. Self-exaltation introduces a bias into consideration of many issues. For example, it creates a vested interest in the incapacity of other people. There is a tendency towards policies and programs which in fact reduce them to that condition and induce them to accept the image of themselves, while the anointed visionaries play the role of rescuers. The vision of morally anointed visionaries ministers to the egos of the anointed, rather than the well-being of the extensible beneficiaries of their efforts. The truly wealthy and powerful can often disregard the rules, including laws, without paying consequences. Rules, traditions, and self-discipline all represent guidance from the distilled experience of others, rather than the self-indulgence based on the inner light of one's own vision. So the ones with the vision and the anointed being the wealthy. Self-exaltation is not inherent in all theories of all visions. Theories of laissez-faire economics do not create a vision of a morally anointed elite. The arrogant vision of the elite comes not from the simple fact that it's a vision, but from the sense of themselves as morally anointed among those who hold this particular vision. That vision makes the particular belief possible, and therefore it becomes a vision which its devotees are loath to relinquish. How little the well-being of the ostensible beneficiaries really matters is shown by how little attention is usually shown to testing theories logically beforehand or empirically afterward, as compared to the unremitting efforts put into propagandizing or into demonizing those with alternative views. Desperately ingenious efforts to evade particular evidence or to denigrate objective facts in general are all consistent with their heavy emotional investment in their vision, which is ostensibly about the well-being of others, but is ultimately about themselves. So basically, rich kids getting to play the role of rescuer strokes the ego of these rich kids. Capitalism and laissez-faire economics doesn't provide them any glory or satisfaction, but socialism can, because they become sort of the guardians of the poor. The problem, of course, is that the ideas are really bad and they hurt people that they claim they wish to help. But it doesn't really matter because it's not really about them, it's about satisfying their own ego. And the same can be said for wanting to eliminate capitalism. Another hypothesis for why rich kids are radical is simply bad parenting. It's plausible that the children of wealthy, while they have money, they don't get the attention they seek from their parents, or perhaps worse, they're given whatever they want and have never heard the word no. Kids who have never told no, who aren't disciplined, haven't learned how to handle disappointment, or don't know how to handle things that don't work out for them, and they never learn to deal with adversity like an adult. Rich kids who have never had any boundaries and just want what they want may sort of devalue reality when competing with their desires. So a rich kid with crappy parents who can do whatever they want may lose the ability to distinguish between what's true and what they want to be true. Since they get whatever they want, that habit of getting whatever they want sort of manifests mentally too. So even if it's not true, they believe it's true, or it should be true, and since they get whatever they want, it must actually be true. Socialism has proven beyond any reasonable doubt to bring disaster, but if a rich kid who gets whatever they want really wants it to be true, and they haven't developed the ability to handle things not being the way they want, it's conceivable this type of person could become a socialist. Living a life of comfort and luxury without danger or adversity may ill-equip them to deal with the real world. It's sort of like someone who's never gotten dirty, and then they've never developed the antibodies to fight bacteria that most of us develop because they've lived in this perfectly clean environment, and actually ends up hurting them over the long haul. In his book, The Great White Elephant, Why Rich Kids Hate Their Parents, Franco Lombardo argues that wealthy parents don't tell their children no very much. When they go out into the world and the world tells them no, they get angry. Lombardo also cites time and parenting as factors. Wealthy parents are often absent parents and kids feel abandoned. When angry parents try to make up lost time with money, the kids get even angrier. But along with poor parenting, these kids may have mental and emotional issues dating back to their parents. For this reason, the wealthy may become more attractive to the structure, authority, and order of the big government state, that being the caring parent they never had. Jonah Goldberg writes in Liberal Fascism, the liberal cult of the child is instructive in its similarities to fascist thought. Children, like youth, are driven by passion, feelings, emotion, and will. These sentiments, in turn, are deeply tied to the narcissistic populism that celebrates the instincts of the masses. I want it now and I don't care if it's against the rules is the quintessential childlike populist passion. Fascism is a form of populism because the leader forges a parental bond with his children. Benito Mussolini himself coined the term totalitarianism to describe a society where everybody belonged, where everybody was taken care of, where everything was inside the state and nothing was outside. Another possible explanation is that these rich kids yearn for distinction. For the children of the wealthy, many are aware they may never surpass the achievements of their successful parents. To their parents, wealth and achievement were metrics of success. But their children, knowing matching them is an uphill battle, have decided to travel the path of least resistance, which is not to play the game at all. The only way they can one-up their parents is not by being more successful in business or whatever, but by doing something that really matters, like politics or like saving the poor via socialism. A wealthy kid may think they can only outdo their parents on moral grounds. If their parents question their laziness or lack of real ambition, they can cite their focus on things that matter more than money and success. They change the rules by which they judge success by their efforts towards moral ends, but these wealthy kids seldom have strong moral foundations. So for them, equality becomes morality, and thus the rich kid becomes a useful idiot for those seeking to wield the powers of more government. Alan Bloom writes, "It is very difficult to distinguish oneself in America, and in order to do so, they specialized in being the advocates of all those in America and the Third World who did not challenge their sense of superiority and who, they imagined, would accept their leadership. Hence, they are largely indifferent to wealth. They are not proud of having acquired it, and have not occupied themselves with the petty and sometimes deforming concerns necessary to its acquisition. And, because they do not particularly care about it, they are more willing to give it up in the name of grand ideals. As a matter of fact, they are eager to do so in the hope of proving that they are not attached to it and open to higher callings. The hypocrisy of it all, tyrannical impulses masqueraded as democratic compassion, and quest for distinction as love of equality. But these elitists were given the distinction they craved without having earned it." Another potential reason why rich kids are radical is education. Another reason could be the fact that these kids have no need for wealth and thus are free to pursue their passion, irregardless of potential career earning power. While children from poor or middle-class families may gravitate towards college majors that might make a good living, it's possible the children of wealthy pursue majors that are more interesting to them, but because these majors lack a lot of earning potential, it's possible more wealthy kids go down this career path, because there is a strong correlation between socialist ideals and college majors. A survey revealed that 8 of 10 philosophy majors support socialism, while economics majors strongly oppose it. Philosophy majors have an overwhelmingly favorable view of socialism, 78%. Meanwhile, 64% of anthropology students and 58% of English and international relations students favored socialism, but only 20% of accounting majors stated they had either a very favorable or somewhat favorable view of socialism, while 22%, 26%, and 28% of students majoring in finance, economics, and law respectively said the same. In other words, students with majors focused on more direct skills like finance, economics, medicine, law are pursuing these majors potentially for financial benefits down the road, while the wealthy kid might pursue more abstract majors like philosophy and categories within the social sciences that don't earn that much. It's definitely possible that the courses with less earning power denigrate capitalism, which may align perfectly with the guilt-ridden wealthy kid, creating the perfect storm for radicalism. So those are some different hypotheses as to why rich kids might be radical. I'm not sure which of these theories is correct or if there's a combination of factors for different cases, but this is one video that I made where I left still uncertain of the exact answer, so I'd love to hear what you think as the most likely causes of some of the arguments presented, or if there are reasons I didn't think about or include here that may be better, please let me know in the comments section below.